In this video, I'll be replacing the front brake pads and rotors in this 2012 Toyota Sienna. First thing I'm going to do before I put the car up in the air is remove some of this excess brake fluid. Now this customer here, they must have topped off their brake fluid, which you really don't want to do. Just the maximum level is where it's supposed to be at. You never want to add brake fluid. That's a whole nother story. I'm just removing some because in this case, when I go to compress the caliper, it's all going to come out, and brake fluid is very caustic. I'm going to go ahead now and move the knuckle so that the caliper is facing me, give a little bit better access. And right now I'm removing those two 14mm bolts that secure the caliper to the bracket. I'm just going to put that out of the way and then remove this hardware here. We're going to be reusing all the hardware because none was provided with the new brake pads. So I'm just setting those aside, removing the two brake pads now. You might need a screwdriver, which you'll see in a second, that I have to use to pry the pads out if you can't just pull them out. One thing I want to point out, you just want to make sure that your caliper is secure, that it's not going to fall and end up damaging your brake hose. I know it's good over here, so I'm just going to leave it. If not, you might want to take a bungee and use that to secure it. I'm just going to remove both of those 17mm bolts now that secure the caliper bracket to the knuckle. And I'm removing the caliper bracket now. I'm just going to set that aside so we can clean it up later. And now I'm just removing the old brake rotor. Here in this case it's coming off real easy. Usually they do on the Siennas, especially on the front. They'll just usually kind of just come right off on their own. If not, you just have to bang on it with a hammer a little bit. Here I'm cleaning up all that old hardware, which again we're going to have to reuse. Just going to try to get it a little bit more shiny. Do some camera magic here in a second. And now those caliper slide pins, I'm going to remove them, clean off all the old grease, and re-grease them. Now when I do caliper slide pins, I like to just take one out at a time, clean it, grease it, and put it back, because a lot of times they can be different. Like here in this case, this slide that I'm removing, you can see it has that rubber bushing on the tip of it. Now as far as greasing the slides go, you don't want to over grease them, especially when you have the type with the rubber bushing like I just showed you. If you over grease these slides with the rubber bushings, it could cause the rubber to swell up and actually cause a lot of resistance and cause caliper pins to lock up. Right now I'm comparing the old brake pads with the new brake pads. Here you can see on the old brake pads they have wear indicators. On the new brake pads there are none. So all four of these new brake pads are basically identical. We can put them in any position because they don't have those wear indicators. So here I applied a little bit of grease to each of the ears of the brake pads. Just want to apply a little, and some people like to grease the hardware. I don't, because I find if you put too much it'll draw a lot of dirt into the caliper, and you don't want that anywhere near your brakes. And I'm just showing here on the bench the way that the brake pads are supposed to be installed into the caliper bracket. I find it a lot easier to do it this way with the brake caliper bracket bolted back onto the knuckle. Right now I'm compressing the pistons back into the caliper. You're going to want to use one of the old brake pads to apply even pressure. Here I'm cleaning up all the metal surfaces and just getting a lot of the rust and crud off of the caliper. Anywhere there's going to be metal on metal contact between the caliper and the brake pads, you're going to want to clean and grease. So those areas that I just showed, you're going to want to make sure that you grease them and clean them real good. Otherwise you're going to end up with some noise. Depending on what type of rotor you've purchased, it could have cosmoline, which is basically machine oil, coating the surfaces. This is in order to inhibit rust during storage. You want to be sure to remove all of this oil with a rag and some brake clean before you install the rotor, otherwise you'll have tremendous squealing. Mine here didn't have it. So right now I'm bolting the caliper mounting bracket back up with those two 17mm bolts. I'm just gunning it on for now. I'm going to do all the final torque by hand after. Last thing before we reinstall the caliper is to reinstall the hardware. Alright, and so once you have everything lined up, you're just going to want to tighten down both of those 14mm slide bolts by hand. You don't want to go too tight on these. You want to get them snug but not super tight. After you put the wheel on, the one last thing to remember to do is pump the brakes. And that does it. That's how you replace the front brake pads and rotors on a 2011 through 2016 Toyota Sienna. Thanks for watching. I hope this video helped you save some money. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer.